we knew all along that we would be abandoned, because we are always abandoned in the end. And we will, that's okay, because we will defend our little land. And you can be assured that we will, there is no weapon that we will refrain from using in order to provide for our own security. In other words, they would be saying to President Obama or whoever, back us in a corner, there's going to be a nuclear war in the Middle East, and you Americans are going to be left to deal with the consequences. And that prospect, I don't mean sort of an outright blackmail, but the logic of that, I think, is recognized in both the Israeli side and the American side. And therefore, we don't want to do anything that might cause the government of Israel to feel abandoned, to feel backed into a corner, and even to be remotely tempted to use nuclear weapons. Because the results would be catastrophic in more ways than we can even tick off. And that's the problem. that is the ultimate reason why this relationship of great power to a seemingly smaller power doesn't find us in a position to be able to exert influence over Israeli behavior as some people imagine we should be able to do so. I think I said that.
What is your take on Time magazine and its cover of Afghan women who had their face mutilated?
Well, I talked about this in an interview today. With you. Okay. I'm only saying that because there were multiple interviews and I forget. And I don't know what you meant, man, when you said that it was disgusting, whether...
Inside the article, it meant that we have to be in Afghanistan because of women. If we don't save the women.
Okay. And of course, there are some people who say disgusting or atrocious or terrible, meaning that the vicious mutilation of this young woman constitutes an argument that we need to stay because we have a moral obligation to Afghan women. My view, I have at least, I think, four quick things to say. Point number one is, I don't for a second believe that when political leaders responsible for the policy of a great power get around the table and say, what are we going to do about that problem? Nobody ever says, let me search my conscience, I really want to do the right thing. So I think we need to accept the fact that the reality of great power, in the reality of great power politics, moral considerations are marginal at best. That doesn't mean that as citizens, we ourselves should not care about moral questions, but we simply need to recognize that the fellas and gals who make the decisions don't care. But we care. And so the question arises, do we have a moral obligation to the people of Afghanistan, and if so, how do we acquit that obligation? And that's where I pose my three questions. And question number one is, well, if we have moral obligations to people out there, meaning if we have moral obligations to compete with or maybe even take precedence over fixing Detroit and Cleveland, why does Afghanistan come first? Why doesn't the moral obligation to the people of Iraq take precedence? Or, as I suggested to you, Mitch, my favorite is, how about the moral obligation to the people of Mexico? I mean, this is our near neighbor. We've had roughly 2 centuries of relations with the Republic of Mexico. Precious little of U.S. policy has been undertaken, thinking what's good for the people of Mexico. I don't necessarily regret all that. We took California. Thank God, right? At the present moment, however, it is the American demand for drugs and the lax American drug laws that are fueling what is in effect an insurgency that is undermining institutions in Mexico that are already weak. You want moral obligation? There's moral obligation. So question question number one, why do Afghans come first? Question number two is, if Afghans come first, then why is the perpetuation of war the best way to meet our moral obligation to these people? If indeed, in a sense, the core issue is abandoning women who will then be abused and brutalized, then why don't we declare that we have a policy that any woman in Afghanistan who feels threatened, in danger, to report to the nearest U.S. military facility or nearest consulate or nearest CIA station and be given sanctuary and brought to the land of the free and the home of the brave, where she will be safe. Matter of fact, we give Arizona preferential treatment to receive the first contingent of Afghan women. And then the last question is, okay, let us stipulate for the sake of argument that our obligation to Afghanistan comes first, and let's stipulate for the sake of argument that perpetuating war is the best way to acquit this obligation to the Afghans. Then I say, if it's so damned important to do that, who's supposed to pay? Who's supposed to foot the bill? And, well, the American people don't. So what Americans say is, oh my God, my conscience, I can't sleep at night thinking about these Afghan women who are being abused, so I'm going to send somebody else's 19-year-old kid over there on his third combat tour.
Right.
And keeping that kid over there for his third combat tour is going to cost $1 million per soldier per year, and I refuse to pay for that. I'm simply going to pile up more and more debt for this war that's supposedly so important. And let, I don't know, some future generation out there, let them figure out how to pay for it. So I am all for seriously including a discussion of moral issues into policy, despite the fact that I don't think the policymakers care that much about it. But if we're going to have a moral, if we want to have a moral component to policy, we need to talk about it in serious terms, not kind of just a bumper sticker that makes me feel good.
You are a retired Army colonel. When do you support war?
Well, I think consistent, first of all, one would have to describe cases and render judgments about specific cases and specific circumstances. The general rule that I believe we should adhere to is the norms prescribed in the just war tradition. A set of ideas that evolved largely at the behest of Christian thinkers, attempting to articulate criteria for when the use of force can be viewed as moral. It is my conviction that those criteria are useful not simply in thinking about the morality of going to war and engaging in war. They're also very useful as a more pragmatic guidance. And here in particular, I would note that the just war tradition says that use of force is moral, and again, to my mind, makes sense only when it's used as a last resort and only in self-defense. Now, the people who have articulated this recognize that the term self-defense is not necessarily defined so narrowly as to mean you can use force, only when the Panther divisions are, charging down University Avenue. That there is a certain element of flexibility in self-defense that enables you to use force other than simply at the very 11th hour. But nonetheless, I think, as a place to begin, last resort, self-defense, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, in an earlier interview that you did.
Let me ask you a question.
Okay.
How late does the BART operate? I have to get to San Francisco.
12:20.
Good, okay,
No,
I'm
we're
good. I'm good. Okay.
No, I understand that. It's called the BART curfew. So, and you have a number of offers. As a former military, as a conservative, what is your view on don't ask, don't tell in the military?
These are terribly nasty questions. Trying to get me to say something that'll get me in trouble. Well, let me be straightforward, and I hope not offensive to anybody. As a conservative, I believe that there is value in the social structures that developed over periods of many generations. And when I'm talking about social structures, I'm talking about the family. And I am a big-time traditionalist when it comes to such matters. That said, a cultural revolution has occurred in this country. And in a period of about, what, maybe 4 decades, has completely swept aside or demolished a previously existing consensus on issues that relate to gender, sexuality, and the like. I am on the losing side of that cultural revolution. And it's over. It's over. Now, I also recognize that, and do not have any trouble with, that we live in a very diverse and pluralistic society. And that therefore the norm that now prevails in this pluralistic, diverse society is that we are permitted enormous individual autonomy in matters relating to sexuality and gender and family and so on. And it is incumbent upon me as a member of this democratic society to accept that outcome. I can exercise my own autonomy, and I can adhere to whatever particular norms I think are preferred norms, but I think it's incumbent upon me to respect your right and privilege to do precisely the same. Now, with regard to the specific issue of gays in the military, I would ask you not to go look for an article that I wrote on this issue back in 1993. But to accept my current view. Which is the one I just expressed. The revolution has happened. It's over. And the American Army is already far too divorced from American society. That's one example of how it's divorced from American society. And that we ought to view that as unacceptable. The American Army needs to reflect American norms. And in that sense, it seems to me that the don't ask, don't tell policy is it's repealed or is long overdue. And quite frankly, I think although President Obama and Secretary Gates are trying to make it look like a great, deliberate, really need to think this over process, I think for all practical purposes, it's a done deal. So that would be my way of trying to dance around that mic. You know, my view has come to be, don't throw anything at me until I finish. This is a joke. Just let me get to the punchline. Just don't get upset. It is know, she's looking at you. I believe that the proper definition of marriage is that it is a union between one man and one woman. That's what I believe. But I also believe, wait a second. I also believe that that union is intended to last until death do we part. And therefore, for the people who get all hot and bothered about gay marriage, I really wish they would also get hot and bothered about divorce, because it seems to me, if for traditionalists like me, who are so committed to traditional social structures, I think divorce probably does a lot more harm to children than the prospect of two guys or two women getting married. So I'm completely retrograde in this regard.
You see that out there, New York Times sometime this week, and talking about that?
No, I didn't.
Like Tuesday or Wednesday.
Okay.
All right, Professor Andrew Bacevich, I want to thank you for your time and for taking my questions.